Okay, we are going to talk about 7 feeding strategies that will come back to bite you and what to do instead. So the first one that we're going to start with is the no thank you bite. Okay, my job as a pediatric feeding therapist is to help a child get to the point where they can take a bite of anything on their plate, and then it's up to them if they want more. I feel very comfortable helping families establish a rule that we take a taste of everything in our family, and then we figure out what else does it need. Does it need a little more salt, a little more butter? Maybe do we just need to dip it in some ranch dressing, like get it to taste better. But if the kids take a taste and they're like, I don't really want any more of this, that's totally fine. Absolutely. We're just learning to taste food and feel comfortable with it. The issue is when we call it a no thank you bite, we're automatically setting these kids up to say they don't like it. I'm going to take my no thank you bite. Or mom or dad might say, remember, take your no thank you bite. We are implying you're not going to like it, just take your bite because you have to. We don't want to set kids up that way. So instead, I just make a rule that we take a taste of everything. That is, if the kids are capable of it. Now, if they have too much anxiety, or they don't have the motor skills, or they just haven't had the exposure to the foods in other ways, and we're suddenly making them put it in their mouth and take a bite, I guarantee you it's a no thank you bite. So we don't want to do it until the kids are ready, but that's my job to get them there. The other strategy that I've been hearing a lot about lately is we're skipping purees. We're skipping purees because we're following a certain model that says to do that. Or we're skipping purees because everybody in my mom group is skipping purees. Or, excuse me, we're skipping purees because my kid doesn't like them. He doesn't like getting messy. And he really likes just grabbing onto a piece of avocado and taking a bite off of it, as long as it's not too ripe. Well, there's a lot of reasons that moms and dads and caregivers decide to skip the purees, but I'm okay with that. It's just that I don't want them to never get on purees. And we think of purees as sort of that starter food, because as I said in previous videos, purees are essentially a thickened liquid, and they actually help kids learn to develop a safe swallow. And I talk a lot about that in my baby book, Baby Self-Feeding. But if parents want to skip them, my feeling is that'd be okay. We just need to make sure that we're working on the skills that spoon feeding brings, like using your top lip to clean out the spoon, with other things. Maybe it's just their finger, or a tool that they like to hold on to and they can dip, or another piece of food. Whatever it happens to be, let me show you an example right here. It might be that they're holding onto a spoon or some sort of dipper, or they might be holding on to a teether like this and learning to dip. If you're okay with it, I certainly am, and you want to dip and present to the child's mouth, just be sure that they're leaning forward and you're getting their permission to take a bite off of there, and that we're not just sticking it right in their mouth. That's often the objection I hear from families, is they want the child to feel a little bit more in control. But feeding is based on a relationship. And the most important thing is that feeding is based on a relationship. And the most important thing is that we read our baby's cues and we pay attention to them, and that this is a conversation we're having through our body language and our expression and our nurturing and our love for each other. So if families want to skip purees, I just want to make sure that they're using other tools, other fingers, foods, etc., to make sure that that child's getting adequate lip closure and developing the muscles they need to propel food back to be swallowed, and that they're very comfortable putting things in their mouth. But they're also really comfortable with the texture of purees, and that can go from smooth to lumpy. We know for sure that research shows that if kids linger on purees past the age of 9 months, they will develop a feeding disorder. And we definitely don't want kids to linger there, but I really don't want kids to skip them, no matter how you decide to present them. Okay, third one. Here's a strategy I run into all the time. Eat your vegetables so you can have dessert. You know, it's kind of an old-fashioned way of getting your kids to eat vegetables. And we know now that that's really not the best way to do it. But gosh, it's so tempting, right? It's so tempting because you're going to feel so much better if they eat those vegetables, and then they might as well just have a little cake too. Well, what we're actually teaching kids by doing that is that eat this stuff, and then you get the good stuff. You know, we want kids to think that all food is delicious and all food is yummy, and that there isn't a good food or a bad food, that there's times for cake, and there's time for broccoli, and there's time for a good burger, and there's times for lasagna. You know, it's not about eat this and then you get that. We don't want to set kids up like that for life where they're rewarded with food. I recently posted on my Facebook page about that, so that might be something you'd be interested in looking at. Let's take a look at the fourth one. I know everybody's going to relate. I think I'm going to get some thumbs up here on this one. Feed him anything he wants. Just put weight on him. This is really common. Feeding therapists, speech language pathologists, registered dietitians, occupational therapists, BCBAs, we hear that all the time. And the parents report to us that someone, a healthcare professional, said, we got to get this kid to grow. Just whenever he opens his mouth, stick some ice cream in there. Like whatever he wants, you give it to him. For a medically necessary situation where that child is at risk and definitely needs quick calories, that's not bad advice. But the problem is you don't want to do that for too long, because you'll end up with a child who gets to eat whatever he wants. And when you are only eating your highly preferred foods, you will eventually get sick of those foods. And then we create a food jag where the kids start to funnel down and narrow down their repertoire until eventually they only have a handful of foods, and they're usually not very nutritious foods. Another example is I often run into that advice with families with kids with food allergies, because the parents are scared, you know, and I would be too. I really understand that. They are scared that their child is going to have an anaphylactic reaction to a certain food. So they limit the restaurants they take the child to, they limit the neighbors' houses they go to, and they are very careful about what they serve that child at home. And the child quickly learns that food is kind of a stressful experience and that I should be careful around it. That can create anxiety in and of itself. And those are the kids who end up on my caseload 10 years later, frankly, who never grew out of the picky eating because they had a peanut allergy when they were 18 months old. It's not uncommon. So I definitely want to stress that when a medical professional tells you to feed him anything he wants, just put weight on him, you can do that temporarily. You know, we do that with kids who have had the flu and dropped some weight, and we're just trying to get a little bit more nutrition into them, and then we get to the other foods. Just don't stay there too long, because it will come back to bite you. Here's one that I was talking to a parent about today. Well, we tell him he can't leave the table until he eats it. That creates a lot of anxiety in children, and it develops a power struggle. You might get that child to eat those peas if you tell him he can't leave the table until he does, but he won't learn to love peas, and he'll only have more anxiety the next time he comes to the table. It might make you feel better because you got peas in him, but it will backfire over time. And we really like children to stay at the table for about 20 to 30 minutes if it's a meal. So we work up to that in feeding therapy. And sometimes we even, you know, we hang out for 45 minutes if we're all having a good time and playing a table game, or just enjoying each other's company, and maybe we're gonna have a little dessert too or something like that. That's great. But the average family meal time is about 20 minutes, maybe 30, depending on the meal and depending on the people are on the table and how much conversation is going on. So if kids haven't eaten when the meal is over, the meal's over. Like, they'll be okay. You know, they have an opportunity for snack in about 2 to 2.5 hours. And even if they're going to go, maybe it's dinner time and they're going to go to bed even an hour later for some of these younger kids, they could definitely have a glass of milk or something like that, just to make sure they get through the night okay and help you feel better. But they're not going to get a second dinner. You know, that's still a bedtime snack. It's not a bedtime dinner. It's still a bedtime snack. It's not a bedtime dinner. Okay, here's my favorite. Eat your bleeping peas. Only they don't say bleep, if you know what I mean. I run into this when especially when the dads, bless their hearts, they get so stressed and they kind of come in like, oh, and they lose it, you know, and out come the bad words. And they just get so mad at the kid because they're stressed and they're worried and they're actually a little scared for their kid. And the kid starts to tear up and he eats the peas. But you know what? He didn't want to stay at the table after that. He doesn't want to eat any more than that. And he's going to remember that the next time he comes back to the table. When our anxiety goes up like that, our cortisol levels also go up, and that decreases appetite. I always talk about my 2-day course, you know, what if you were at a restaurant and the waiter came up and said, eat that filet mignon? Even if you love filet mignon, if he used a few 4-letter words and snapped at you like that, you would leave the restaurant. Well, we don't want to do that to our kids either. So take a breath. They're going to be okay if they don't eat their peas. That's my job, to help them eat their peas. And we're going to talk about a lot of different ways to do that. So make sure you're typing in some questions. We are almost done with the 7 strategies, and then we're going to tackle real specific issues that you're having, especially around some of these strategies that are tending to backfire. And how do we get out of this trap? How about this one? Anybody run into this? He'll eat well in front of the TV. I'll tell you, 50% of my caseload, that's the issue. I'll go over to the home and the kids will eat really well if they're in front of an iPad or in front of the TV. That's called distraction in applied behavior analysis. And families kind of like their kids to have something distracting in front of them because they know they'll get in more food. I'm sure you've heard me say before that it's no different than going to the movie theater and you're in the darkened room and that big old amazing movie is up there and I got that big tub of popcorn because it's the Best Buy. I can eat that entire tub in an hour and a half because I'm so distracted by what's going on the screen. And I stand up and I feel terrible, but I don't even remember eating most of it. It's mindless eating. If you put that big tub of popcorn in front of me at dinner, there's no way I could eat it all. You know, there's just no way because I'm aware of it. Well, that's what we're trying to create here is we want kids to pay attention to their body and be aware of their hunger cues, eat what's an appropriate amount until they feel full, and then stop because more food is coming. Sometimes we'll run into kids who are really, really picky eaters, and then they have a big binge on the 4th or 5th day, and that's not a good thing because they learn, not going to have that, and then I'm eating everything in sight. I am starving, and oh my gosh, this feels so good. I want another pizza. I want more chicken nuggets, and I want this, and I want that. That's not a good way to eat, of course, but it really wreaks havoc on your digestive system as well. So we don't want kids to get in the habit of eating in front of the TV. That being said, yeah, Friday night, pizza in front of the TV while you have family movie night, absolutely. Just don't make it a habit, you know, and be careful in the car too. We all have videos going in the car all the time now, and you know, we all drive through every once in a while. But just be sure that the kids aren't so zoned out. We don't want them zoned out on the movie and zoned out on the eating. That can create a really difficult ditch to climb out of. So I'm going to take a look at some of the questions here, and let's problem solve a little bit with some of your questions. And then remember, I'm going to be uploading this to YouTube, and I'll be adding some more videos that will be helpful for you. They're usually, one side, they'll be up in this corner on a card. You can't miss it. So on my YouTube channel, you'll see sometimes it'll say suggested ideas for picky eaters or other things like that. You'll have a lot of different videos to help you. All right, let's see if we have any questions. I'm just going to take a second here to scroll through. None so far. Lots of people here. Hi, you guys. All my friends. Well, let's take just a minute. I know you're typing in, so let's just take a minute to revisit a few of these and talk about some solutions. So we talked a little bit about the no thank you bite, that really what we're trying to create there is we're trying to create a child who will take a taste of anything. But again, they have to have the motor skills and the confidence and the trust to do so. So you're going to start by just getting those kids used to a little bit of food on their plate that everybody else is eating at the table. And I'll put some more videos up here in this corner as soon as I upload to YouTube. Let's talk about skipping purees. If you want to skip purees, that's okay, but sooner or later, you've got to introduce them. So even if your kid isn't eating them, make sure you've got some on the tray so they see them, they smell them, they get a little messy with them with their fingers. You might be surprised. They might end up taking a little bit of a lick, and eventually when they're able to use their own spoon, they might start dipping into it. Try some purees too, like if your baby can handle dairy, like yogurt, or something savory, like puree up a creamy soup. Even one that comes out of the can is fine to start with at first. You can make your own, of course. There's plenty of wonderful organic soups that you can just blend up and add a little bit of potato flakes, and they'll make a little bit of a thicker puree. That's a great one for kids to dip into. It'll stay on their finger or whatever they're dipping, and maybe it's just they need a little bit more savory experience. So consider starting with something that has a little bit more kick. Maybe that's all they're missing. Let's talk about eating your vegetables so that you can have dessert. We've talked a little bit about how we don't want to put dessert on a pedestal, and I'm going to put a YouTube video right up here so you can learn more about that. So we'll click on that once we upload to YouTube. Feed him anything he wants. Just put weight on him. That's fine in the short term, and I'm talking about a week, like not much at all. And then you've got to expose kids to new foods, lots of food exploration, and then begin to expand their repertoire from there. Do not get stuck in that ditch, because that kid will end up in feeding therapy. You're not leaving the table until you eat that. Again, just like eat your peas, that only raises our anxiety. And kids who are picky eaters, frankly, tend to have a little bit more anxiety than most kids anyway, because they're constantly being exposed to new foods, and these are all new experiences. A lot of this is new just if you're 3 years old. You know, they only have 3 years of life experience. So constantly being exposed to new things in the world, and then we're throwing new food at them too. We want to keep cortisol levels down. We want to keep anxiety down. Family mealtime should be fun. Family mealtime should be fun. And the last one was about eating in front of the TV. So we can get into that specifically, but I have a feeling a few people are going to have some questions. So let me just glance over here. And Amy asks, any advice for a 3-year-old who is stuck on eating purees? We've tried food chaining and play with food, but no success yet. Hi, Amy. Well, there can be a lot of different reasons why a 3-year-old is stuck on purees. Way too many for me to list right here. But in general, my first thought is the oral motor skill of learning to chew. In short, the way I will typically introduce chewing to a child is I'll start with them chewing on a non-food item. So something kind of soft that they can bite into. Make sure they're very comfortable with that sort of thing. Definitely dip that into the purees and have them chew on it while they get the flavor and the texture of the puree. You can also introduce any of the silicone feeders. There's a great one from Kids Meat that I'll put in the comment section when I'm all done here that I really, really like. Make sure you get one that's pretty long. The silicone pocket is long and fits far back in the mouth. Not one that they just nibble on with the front of their mouth. That doesn't really do much good when it comes to true chewing. The other thing you want to think about is maybe giving them something that will automatically turn into puree after the first chew. So consider something that's really meltable, like freeze-dried strawberries from Costco, or gosh, you can get the freeze-dried vegetables at Whole Foods. I know that there are, oh my gosh, here's a good example. Just yesterday, I was at Costco, and it's mango season, so they have freeze-dried mango strips. You can also use the rice crackers or even the puffs if you want, but those are kind of bland. Some kids need a little bit more something to feel in their mouth. So I like these mango strips because I can break off a little pea-sized piece. It's got a little kick to it because it's kind of tart, and encourage your child to put it right here and bite into it one time. It will melt right away. It's the size of a pea. Make sure they grab their drink and wash off their tongue right away. So you might be there with the straw cup. You might even be putting the food on their molar as long as they're comfortable with that and leaning forward and giving you permission. And model for them, chomp, and then give them a drink. That first chomp, even if they have to pull it out afterwards, is the first step to chewing. Once they can start to get that, then you're going to add 2 chomps and 3 chomps, and then you should be able to build from there. I'll try to cover it in another video, but I think that gives you plenty to get started with, so hopefully that's helpful. Tracy asks, my daughter decided she doesn't like something before she even tries it. Any tip to help her go in with a more positive attitude? Yeah. So in Adventures in Veggieland, which is right, wrong, there we go, right behind me here, I talk a lot about taste testing and really encouraging kids, especially as they're cooking, to learn that not every taste is going to taste good. That professional chefs go in with these tiny little tasting spoons. You know, they're the little plastic ones that we get at the gelato store when you get a little sample of gelato, or at Baskin Robbins. The little tiny spoons. You can get them on Amazon. Well, they have a whole glass just filled with those tasting spoons. And the chef will pick one up, taste the sauce. Oh, it needs more gel. They didn't like that taste. They're figuring out, what else does it need? I want kids to understand every taste is not going to taste good. But the more we taste, the more we can figure out what we should do to that food so that it's more agreeable to our palate. And that's why I was saying earlier about, wanting kids to be willing to take a taste of anything. Not because they're going to like it, but just because they can taste it. So that's the message you're trying to share, and model that for her. You know, as you're cooking too, and hopefully you have her in the kitchen with you and her helping, is take taste and say, gosh, too much lime juice in that guacamole. What can we do to get rid of that tartness? It's fine if you don't like it, but we can solve that issue. Let's see. Jessica asks, what are some strategies to help a parent get away from eating with distraction of a TV or iPad? Well, Jessica, let me give you a couple of different ideas, and then I'll make a point to include in the card right up here on YouTube what I talked about last week, because we went into that in a little bit more detail. But I want to share some of those strategies with you too. It's a really common question. First of all, if it's a child that will only eat in front of the TV, like a lot of my clients with autism are really stuck on the iPad and the TV, and it has to be on all the time, then what a feeding therapist will do is first they'll start with just getting that child to come to the table just to play. And once he's able to come to the table and be comfortable just playing for about 10 minutes and not get up, then we start to introduce just highly preferred foods at the table. Meanwhile, the parents can still keep giving him the majority of his nutrition in front of the TV because we don't want to jeopardize that. Then we start to merge the two. So at home, if your child's already coming to the table and he's fine with new foods on his plate, if he's not, that's what you have to work on first. But if he's fine with the new food just being on his plate with some of the highly preferred food, then you can go ahead and bring the iPad to the table if he was in front of the TV on the couch, just to work on being at the table. But then you're going to slowly fade it away. So you might say, let's take a bite, and then we can watch the iPad for a few seconds, and gradually start to fade it away over time. I have some really specific strategies for older children who are really, really upset, major meltdowns. Sometimes even some of my kids can be a little bit, they start to hit and that sort of thing. I have some really specific strategies around that. So if that's the situation, parents can also sign up for a Skype or a phone consult with me. Just go to Parent Coaching on my website, and we'll break it down specifically for that child, how to help them get out of that trap. Let's see. Oh, hi, Casey. Casey says, I'm struggling helping an 18-month-old who has been tube fed for the last 6 months. I know appetite is an important part of learning to love food. However, due to her feeding schedule, it doesn't seem that she experiences hunger. Such a common problem with kids who are tube fed. Well, usually the way I approach that is first we have to get the skill before we get the hunger. So maybe they're getting 4 or 5 tube feedings a day. The first thing you're working on is just the skill, biting, chewing, and swallowing. And when you feel like they can maybe do that with, I don't know, 10 different foods, maybe it's a lot of different purees is the way to start with that child's particular motor skills, whatever you think, Casey, in your profession. Once the child can do that, then you're going to start working on volume. So again, the child has roughly about 10 different foods, wide variety. They can chew and swallow them with ease, but now the problem is they just are never hungry to take in more. What I typically do, and again, always check with the rest of the medical team because every kid is different, but usually the way I do this with kids on tubes is that I sometimes will introduce their overnight tube feeding to make sure they're getting enough nutrition. Parents often let that go first because the nighttime can be a little tricky. But actually, one strategy is to reintroduce it because they will be more hungry during the day when you take it away another one. Whether you do that or not, the next step would be to think about what meal or snack is the best. Like, you know what? They actually eat pretty well at lunch. Usually it's lunch. Well, that's the tube feeding that you're going to drop first. And you might talk to the registered dietitian, the pediatrician, et cetera, and find out whether we need to spread out that lunchtime tube feeding over the rest of the feedings, add it to the nighttime, like how are we going to make up those calories? Or are we going to take a little bit of a risk, just temporarily, really cut down on those calories and take that away completely? Because if we give him high calorie foods, he might be able to get in 20 bites instead of 10 because now he's listening to his hunger. If you wanted to, you could also ask the doctor about an appetite stimulant, and that will often kind of boost things along. So, but the thing about appetite stimulants is you can't do them if the child doesn't have the motor skills because that would just make him hungry and it wouldn't be fair to him. So you have to make sure you have the skill first. So skill, then build hunger, and then work from there on volume. Take it one step further. If lunchtime starts to go well, then you're going to take the next feeding that you think he'll be really hungry with, or you're going to adjust the tube feedings accordingly. Sometimes I'll take away the 4 o'clock tube feeding, and that'll make him extra hungry for dinner, but he still can't take in enough, so we'll add a tube feeding right after. So there are lots of different strategies, but the idea here is that you take away that first feeding so that they build some hunger, and you consider if it's okay with the team to add an appetite stimulant just so that kid really feels it. Because as you said, if he doesn't feel it, he may not even know what it is when he does feel it. You know what I mean? Like a lot of kids are just hangry and they don't realize they're actually hungry. That's why they're so cranky like that. But they don't know what that feels like because they've never really had to before. Very, very good question. Justine asks, any ideas to promote carryover to the home? I have kiddos that do great with me, but really dig in their heels at home. The trick to that is whether you're working in a hospital, clinic, school, or you're like me and you do home therapy, but once you leave, you can't get the generalization with other people, like at the mealtime table. The trick to that is to make sure that the caregiver is doing the therapy. So I'll start with the child one-on-one, and I usually ask the parents to be around the corner. Now, in early intervention, the parents need to be right there with you, but it's permissible for them to watch on a screen. So you might have like a baby monitor where they can be around the corner, watch and listen, but their body isn't in the same room, but they're still present. It's like, just being behind a one-way mirror. So that way I can still talk to them. I can videotape with their permission. We can view it later and they can be a part of things. Once I have developed a treatment plan, 2 or 3 sessions in at the most, I bring that parent in as soon as I can. Watch for the child's behavior to change when the parent comes to the table, because they're kind of used to the parent being the cue to not eat. No offense to the parents at all. It's just that we all perform certain behaviors depending on the environment and the people around us. We know we're all a little bit different depending on who's in the room, right? Well, if you're worried about that, when the parent comes to the table and you're working with a child, when I worked at the hospital, I had a stack of magazines right by my little table where I worked with kids in my treatment room. And I would ask the parents to come in, and I'd cue them, like tell them ahead of time, I want you to pick up that Women's Day magazine and just have your back turned a little bit to your child, and, you know, just kind of leaf through, but pay attention, but don't stare. This is a little bit of a buffer so that your child doesn't feel like you're really you have the spotlight on them. And then if you sense that it's going really well and you can be more participatory and he's not going to suddenly freeze up or start to behave differently, then put the magazine down. In other words, we're going to fade you into this. At that point, I'm going to hand you the chewy tube, and I'm going to have you start doing some of this. I'm going to show you how I'm reinforcing some of the bites. I'm going to get you to do the therapy, and I'm going to sit on the side and just tell you what to do and use more of a coaching model. Once I've done that, then I start to transition to strategies at home. And I've got a bunch of different ones like that, but the parent needs to be able to follow through at home. It starts with him being able to follow through in therapy. And if he's doing it well in therapy, then have him start practicing whatever you're doing in therapy at home. And from there, you can start to build on meals. But first you work on skill, and then you work on meals. Meals should just be about family time right now. Oh, Justine mentioned she's in an outpatient setting. That's what I was doing too when I was in the hospital. So I think one of the things to consider there is that one strategy I used to do is I would take a picture of me, and my parents would laugh and call it flat Mel. Like, I'm 6'1", so that it wasn't like a full picture, but it was like my face. And we would put whatever we were working on, we put little symbols or little goals there where the kid could see it, even if they were 2. So might be a picture of a crunch or something that represented whatever our skill was. But my face was there. And it was funny, the parents would often just put it at the table and say, we're going to do Coach Mel's homework. And there was something about having my face there that the kids are like, okay, this is serious. You might try that strategy. Plus, it just sets the tone that we're going to do our food homework right now. So hopefully that's helpful. If you can also possibly team up with someone who can go into the home, that's another good strategy. But honest to goodness, it's more about having them do the therapy with you, have you back off. They are in charge in your treatment room. They're the therapist in a way. It should start to go better then after you've started that. If you have more questions about that too, you can always sign up for a coaching time and bring me 5 or 6 cases that you're working on, and we'll come up with some real specifics for not only that child, but also those parents, because a lot of it depends on the parent's personality and their level of anxiety, because they're going through so much with these kids. Amy asks, I do birth to 3, which is early intervention, home visits, and I'm using Adventures in Veggieland with a family as a guide for a child who's extremely aversive. That's so awesome. He has interacted with more foods than he had previously when we were doing pure food chaining and play. I love food chaining and play too, but you know, it's so nice to have an extra tool in your toolbox, and I'm so glad my book is helping you. It's a family-friendly approach to thinking about food in another way, and we've had better follow-through using your book. Amy, don't make me cry. I thought you were going to ask a question. That's really nice. That's why I wrote it. After we wrote Raising a Healthy, Happy Eater, I realized that what parents, they like that book a lot. I mean, it's done really well, and I'm so grateful for that. But I realized they wanted a plan. So I went to my publisher and I said, I've come up with this plan that I've been using for years, but I'm putting it in a book, and it's called The 3 E's. Expose, explore, expand. It's a system where you go from fun to yum. And really, this is a feeding therapy book, but if I call it that, not everybody's going to buy it. And I actually need every parent to buy it so that we don't have this issue of 25% of typically developing kids becoming really, really picky eaters, and that we get back on the track to healthy eating like we used to have. So that's why I wrote that book, and it just means so much to me that it's working for you. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you. Jessica mentions, I have kids that will eat a variety of foods with me during our sessions, but still have trouble eating those same foods at home. I think that's kind of what we talked about. So great, thank you. Let's see. Taking a look at any other ones. Bear with me for a second. There's so many questions here. I think, hi, Jeff. Deb says, I have to tell you the book is really helping, and I got a kiddo to eat a sandwich rather than tearing it apart for the first time today. Oh, that's awesome. Hey, you know what? I'm glad you brought that up. I'll be sure to post the video on how to help kids take a bite off a sandwich and tear it away and not stuff it in their mouth. So we'll put that as one of the cards on this video as well. Are there any other questions before we go watch The Bachelorette? I'm taping it, so, you know. Oh God, I sounded so old there. Tape? That's, I'm recording it. I'm so old, I'm so old. Okay, I'm gonna double check and just make sure before we sign off. I'm gonna be in North Carolina this weekend teaching my 2-day course, and then I'll be in Texas a couple weeks from now, and then I'm gonna be in Medford, Oregon teaching a parent course up there. So be sure to check on my website for all of those events. And don't forget that you can now watch the Picky Eater course and the Pediatric Nutrition course, both of my video courses, for a discounted price if you want to sign up for both, and that's on my website. But if you have any questions, let me know. I think, I'm going to double check, but I think we may have, I think we did it. I think we did it. All right, yay. I love doing Mondays with Coach Mel. Thanks for bringing so many questions. Make sure you're part of my Facebook group called Adventures in Veggie Land. Lots of families are sharing ideas there on how to help kids learn to love vegetables. I've been getting some really cool ideas there and using them in therapy. So that group is right at the top of my Facebook page, my Munch Bud Melanie Potock. And other than that, I hope you guys have an amazing week. Thanks so much for being here. Bye, everybody.